The first time the orphan girl felt the floor tilt under her, it wasn't from hunger or cold. It was from a man in a tailored suit pointing at her like she was a stain on marble. "You're done," he said, loud enough for the lobby to hear, loud enough for the fountain to keep splashing like it didn't care. The security guard's hand closed around her elbow, not rough, but certain. Her employee badge swung against her chest, plastic tapping plastic, while her paper lunch sack split open and an apple rolled across the polished stone. People stepped around it like it might bite. Mara Kline's throat burned, but no sound came out. How do you defend yourself when the room has already decided you're guilty? And why was the man with the sharp jaw and the cold eyes acting like he couldn't even recognize her as human? What you're about to hear is a recreated story, with a few details carefully adapted, while keeping the heart of what happened intact. Mara was 19, an orphan girl who had learned early that crying in front of powerful people only made them hurry past you faster. She had been working at the St. Ainsley Hotel for 7 months, folding napkins into crisp triangles, carrying trays that weighed more than her school backpack used to, smiling until her cheeks ached. She was saving every extra dollar in a jar under her bed at Harbour House, the group home where the radiator clanked all night and the hallway always smelled like bleach and old toast. That jar was her future, her plan to start a nursing assistant program at the community college. And now, with one sentence, a stranger in a suit had kicked it off the table. The guest's watch went missing, the manager had whispered earlier, eyes sliding away from hers. The footage shows you near the suite. Footage, near missing, words that felt like stones dropped into her stomach. Mara had tried to explain that she'd been called to bring towels, that she'd never even stepped inside the bedroom, that she couldn't afford to replace a watch worth more than her entire year. But the manager's smile was thin. "Mr. Vale is here," he'd said, as if that name ended all conversations. And then Adrian Vale himself had appeared, the hotel's owner and the face on the framed magazine covers near the elevators, and he had looked at Mara like she was a problem to remove before it embarrassed him. "We don't keep thieves," he said, and the word thief stuck to her skin. That was the injustice that cracked her life open. They marched her toward the revolving doors, and she saw her reflection spin away in the glass. Dark hair pulled back, uniform too big at the shoulders, eyes too wide. She felt something fall from her pocket, a small silver locket on a thin chain, and she reached for it, but the guard's grip tightened. "Leave it," he murmured, not unkindly, and she swallowed the urge to beg. Outside, the city air smelled like car exhaust and roasted nuts from a street cart. The hotel behind her glowed warm and golden through the glass, like a world that had never heard the word orphan. Mara's hands shook as she walked, because that locket was the one thing she owned that held the past. A tiny photo of her parents she barely remembered, faces soft and blurry from too many years of being opened and closed. She told herself she would come back for it. She told herself a lot of things. Then she heard the crying. It wasn't a baby's wail or a tantrum. It was the kind of sob that sounded like it had been held in too long, like it had nowhere safe to land. It came from the little park across the street, where the hotel's fancy guests sometimes walked their little dogs. Mara could have kept going. She could have protected herself for once. But the sound pulled at something inside her that had never been able to ignore lost kids, because she knew what it was to be lost and watched and not claimed. She followed the sound past trimmed hedges and a bench that smelled like rain. Under the stone fountain, half hidden behind a planter, a boy about 7 was curled up with his knees to his chest, cheeks wet, fists clenched. His shoes were too clean for this sidewalk. His sweater looked soft enough to cost more than Mara's winter coat. He looked up at her with panic, like he expected her to shout at him too. "Hey," Mara said softly, keeping her distance the way the shelter staff taught volunteers to do with scared animals. "I'm not going to touch you. What's your name?" The boy tried to speak, but the sob caught. His eyes darted toward the hotel, toward the glittering doors. I can't," he whispered. Mara's heart hammered. Was he lost? Had someone hurt him? Where were his parents? She didn't know any of that, but she knew one thing: he was alone right now. "Look at me," she said, lowering herself to sit on the wet edge of the fountain. Cold seeped through her pants. "We can breathe together. In and out." She demonstrated, slow, exaggerated, and after a moment the boy's shoulders stopped bouncing so hard. "I can't find my dad," he choked. "He got mad. He said I ruined everything." Mara swallowed, because she recognized that phrase like an old bruise. "You didn't ruin everything," she said. "Adults say big things when they're scared. Sometimes they don't mean what they say." The boy stared at her like that idea was new. "What if he leaves?" he whispered. Mara's hands curled into her sleeves. "What if he does? What if nobody comes?" She forced her voice steady. "He'll look for you," she said, even though she couldn't be sure. Then she did the smallest thing she could think of. She took her crumpled napkin from her pocket, the one she'd stuffed there from the break room out of habit, and started folding it, fingers moving automatically the way they had when she'd make little paper boats for younger kids at Harbour House. "This is a brave boat," she told him, folding the corners. "It can float through anything. Want to hold it?" The boy reached out, hesitant, and took the paper boat like it was fragile and important. His breathing slowed. His crying quieted to sniffles. "I'm Evan," he said finally. "Okay, Evan," Mara replied, and her gaze flicked back to the hotel doors because she knew she should bring him back, even if it meant stepping into the place that had just thrown her away. But what would happen if she walked through those doors again? And why did a sick feeling tell her that Evan's father wasn't just any man inside that golden building? Mara stood, wiping her damp hands on her thighs, and offered Evan her palm without forcing it. He didn't take it, but he followed close, paper boat clutched tight. As they crossed the street, the hotel's perfume hit her like a wall. Polished wood, citrus cleaner, the faint sweetness of expensive flowers. The revolving door whooshed, and for a second she saw herself back inside, still employed, still believing hard work could buy safety. Then the security guard at the entrance stiffened. "You," he said, recognition hardening his face. Mara's stomach dropped. "I'm bringing him back," she blurted, nodding at Evan. "He was crying in the park. He's lost." Evan pressed into her side like a magnet. The guard's gaze slid to the boy's sweater, the neat hair, the kind of child who belonged here. His voice softened, but only a little. "You can't be here," he said. "You were escorted out." Mara's cheeks burned. "He needs his dad," she insisted. "Please." "Just call someone." Evan's lower lip trembled again. "Don't make her go," he whispered, and the words cracked something in Mara, because she'd said versions of that sentence in her own head 1,000 times as a kid. People in tuxedos and dresses flowed past them like a river, laughing, bracelets clinking. A string quartet played somewhere inside, bright and careless. Mara felt the world split into two halves, the warm, rich half that didn't notice pain unless it spilled onto their shoes, and the cold half where you learn to swallow your hurt and keep moving. She looked down at Evan. "Can you tell me your dad's name?" she asked. Evan sniffed. "Vale," he said. "My dad is Mr. Vale." Mara's ears rang. Vale. Adrian Vale. The man who had fired her, called her a thief, and thrown her onto the street like she was nothing. Her mouth went dry. Was this some cruel trick of the universe? How could the boy she'd comforted belong to him? She didn't have time to decide, because footsteps approached, firm and fast, and the lobby seemed to hush around them. Adrian Vale appeared, taller than she remembered from across the desk, a dark suit cut perfectly to his shoulders. His eyes landed on Evan first, and something flickered there, relief, quickly smothered by anger. Then his gaze snapped to Mara, and the flicker turned to stone. "Evan," he said, voice low and tight. "What are you doing out there?" Evan's small hand found Mara's sleeve and clenched it. "I couldn't breathe," he said, and his voice shook. "You were mad. I got lost." Adrian's jaw flexed. His eyes, cold as before, cut to Mara again. "And you," he said, like she was an inconvenience that had grown legs. "Why are you still here?" Mara's tongue felt heavy. 1,000 answers crowded her throat. "Because your son was crying, because you threw me out, because I did nothing wrong." But none of them came out clean. "He was alone," she managed. "He was scared." Adrian's nostrils flared. Around them, guests slowed, curious. Cameras flashed from the far side of the lobby, where a banner read, "Vale Foundation Winter Benefit." Mara hadn't even realized it was a charity night. Of course it was. Of course the same building that had just accused her of theft, was hosting a fundraiser about helping others. "Security," Adrian said sharply, eyes never leaving Mara. "Get her out." Evan's face crumpled. "No!" he shouted, and the sound echoed against marble. Heads turned fully now. A woman in a glittering gown whispered into her phone. Mara felt the heat of humiliation creep up her neck. She could already imagine the story. Fired employee harasses billionaire family. She bent toward Evan, voice shaking. "Evan, listen to me," she said. "Your dad's here, you're safe, I have to go." Evan grabbed her sleeve harder. "You promised," he whispered, desperate. Mara's heart clenched. Had she promised? She'd promised a brave boat. She'd promised breathing. She'd promised without saying it that she wouldn't disappear. But disappearing was what she had to do to survive. She peeled his fingers gently away. "Hold the boat," she told him softly. "When you feel like you can't breathe, squeeze it. Remember, in and out." Evan sobbed again, and this time Adrian's expression tightened in a way that looked like pain he refused to admit. "Evan!" Adrian snapped, then lowered his voice as if the cameras could hear. "Stop!" The word stop hit Mara like a slap, because she'd heard it from adults her whole childhood, always when she needed them most. 2 guards approached. Mara stepped back, palms up. "I'm leaving," she said quickly. Please don't yell at him, he was terrified." Adrian's eyes flashed. "You have no right to tell me how to parent," he said, and there it was. Power, sharp and absolute. Mara nodded, swallowing her pride like a bitter pill, and turned toward the door. She made herself walk without running. Behind her, Evan's cries followed like a tether. Outside, the cold air hit her face, and she realized her hands were shaking so hard she could barely close them. Someone inside had her locket. Someone inside had her future in their fist. And now she had done a kind thing for the very family that had crushed her. Why did it feel like fate had put her in front of Evan for a reason? And if Adrian Vale had the power to erase her with a word, what would he do now that he'd seen her with his son? That night at Harbour House, the hallway lights buzzed like tired insects. Mara climbed the stairs to the girls' room with legs that felt too heavy, passing the bulletin board where flyers promised job readiness and stay positive, in cheerful colors that didn't match the peeling paint. In the room, the air smelled like laundry detergent and the cheap vanilla spray someone had used to cover old sadness. Her roommate Tessa sat cross-legged on her bed, headphones around her neck, watching Mara with worried eyes. "You look like you saw a ghost," Tessa said. Mara tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "I got fired," she said, the words finally real when spoken. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth. "From St. Ainsley? But that was your steady job." Mara nodded, fingers digging into her sleeves. "They said I stole something. A watch. They didn't listen." Tessa swore under her breath. That's messed up." Mara sat on her own bed, thin mattress squeaking, and stared at the jar under it. The coins inside caught the light. She'd been so proud of them, each one a decision to skip a snack, to walk instead of take the bus. Now the jar looked like a joke. "They took my locket," she whispered. "It fell, I couldn't grab it." Tessa's face softened. "Mara," she didn't finish, because what could you say to an orphan girl who lost the last piece of her past in a building full of strangers? Mara lay back and stared at the ceiling where a water stain looked like a cloud. Her chest felt tight again, the way it had when Evan said, "What if he leaves?" She thought of Evan's small fingers on her sleeve. She thought of Adrian Vale's eyes like locked doors. She should have walked away in the park. She should have protected herself. So why didn't she? Because you don't stop being a kid who wants someone to come back for you, even when you're 19, she thought. In the morning, she still woke before dawn, because her body didn't know how to sleep in. She washed her face in the shared bathroom, cold water biting, and tied her hair back with the same fraying elastic. She went downstairs to help set out breakfast because Ms. Darlene, the night staff, always looked relieved when someone offered. The kitchen smelled like oatmeal and burnt toast. Kids shuffled in, some rubbing their eyes, some already guarded. Nico, a 10-year-old boy with a chipped front tooth and too big hoodie, slid into the chair closest to Mara. He wasn't her brother, not by blood, but he clung to her like one. "You're up early," he said, eyeing her. Nico had been abandoned at a bus station 2 years ago. He didn't trust adults who said they were staying. Mara handed him an extra banana. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. Nico peeled the banana slowly. Did your job people do something? He asked, sharper than his age. Mara hesitated. She had tried to protect Nico from bad news before, like a shield made of smiles, but he always sensed cracks. Yeah, she said, they let me go. Nico's jaw tightened. That's stupid, he muttered. Oh, you're the only person who actually works. Mara almost smiled at that, but then she remembered the lobby, the word thief, the way people looked through her. I'll find something else, she promised, more to herself than Nico. The day dragged with small tasks, helping Ms. Darlene fold laundry, checking the notice board for job postings, walking to the bus stop with Nico because he'd started at a new school and still got nervous. The city felt louder today, horns sharper, the winter air cutting through her worn coat. She had $27 in her wallet and a trespass warning in her pocket from the hotel security guard who'd shoved it at her as she left. The paper felt like a brand. Around noon, a call came into the shelter's main line. Ms. Darlene waved Mara over, eyes wary. It's for you, she whispered. Mara took the receiver. A polished voice said, This is the administrative office of St. Ainsley Hotel. We're calling to inform you that due to the circumstances of your termination, we will be contacting your references if necessary. Mara's grip tightened. I didn't steal anything, she said, voice shaking. I want my locket back. A pause, then. Any personal items left on property are held pending review. Pending review, like she was a case file, not a person. When she hung up, her hands were cold. They trying to scare you? Ms. Darlene asked softly. Mara nodded. They already ruined my reference, Mara said. How am I supposed to get hired anywhere? Ms. Darlene's eyes darted toward the kids, then back. Listen, she said, lowering her voice. You can't bring trouble here, you know that. The words stung, even though Mara understood the fear behind them. Harbour House survived on donations and a fragile reputation. One scandal could cost them funding, could cost kids their beds. Mara swallowed. I know, she whispered. That afternoon she walked to a small diner and asked for a shift. The manager glanced at her thin resume, then at her face. We'll call you, he said, and his tone already meant no. Mara left with her stomach empty and her pride bruised. As she passed the St. Ainsley again, she saw black cars lined up, a red carpet being rolled out for the foundation event. She kept her head down. Then she heard a sound that made her stop. A child laughing, bright and sudden, near the entrance. She turned just for a second and saw Evan through the glass standing beside a woman in a sleek suit who held his shoulder. Evan's laugh faded fast, like someone had snapped it shut. His eyes lifted and met Mara's across the distance. His face lit up with recognition, then crumpled into longing. The woman followed his gaze, then looked at Mara with sharp interest. She leaned down and murmured something to Evan, and his shoulders slumped. Mara's heart pounded. Who was that woman? Why did she look like she owned the air around her? And why did it feel like she had just marked Mara as a problem? Mara forced herself to walk away, but she could feel eyes on her back. Someone was watching. Someone had seen her kindness with Evan and filed it away. And if powerful people were paying attention to an orphan girl who had nothing, what did they want from her? 2 days later, the first official letter arrived. It came in a thick white envelope with the hotel's crest embossed like a threat. Ms. Darlene handed it to Mara with a tight mouth. Read it outside, she said, as if the paper itself could contaminate the shelter. Mara stood on the front steps where the wind smelled like snow and the railing was cold under her fingers. The letter said she was barred from St. Ainsley property. It said any attempt to contact guests or staff would be considered harassment. It said they were continuing an internal review regarding the missing item. Internal review. Like she hadn't been fired in front of strangers already. Like her name wasn't already dirty. Mara's eyes blurred. She wanted to rip the letter, but she couldn't waste the paper. She folded it carefully, hands trembling, and tucked it into her pocket like a weight. That same day, she had an interview at a small assisted living center across town. The building smelled like lemon cleaner and warm soup. An older woman at the front desk smiled at Mara's polite greeting, and for a brief moment, Mara felt normal. She sat across from the hiring coordinator, answered questions about patience and reliability, and talked about how she liked helping people feel safe. I grew up in a group home, she said honestly. So I know what it's like to need someone kind. The coordinator's eyes softened. We could use more of that, she said. Hope rose in Mara's chest like sunlight. Then the coordinator glanced at her computer screen and frowned. We did call your last employer, she said gently. Mara's stomach dropped. They told you something, Mara whispered. The coordinator hesitated, then nodded. They said you were terminated for misconduct, she admitted. I'm sorry. The hope snapped. Mara's hands went numb. It's not true, she insisted, voice cracking. They blamed me because it was easy. I didn't do anything. The coordinator's expression held sympathy, but sympathy didn't pay rent. Without clarity, she said. Our policy... Mara stood quickly. I understand, she said, even though she didn't. She left the building before she could cry in front of anyone. On the bus ride back, she watched people in expensive coats scroll on their phones, while the bus heater rattled and coughed. The city felt split again. Those who could make one call and erase someone, and those who could only sit and absorb it. Back at Harbour House, Nico sat on the floor coloring with dull crayons. He looked up at her face and frowned. You didn't get it, he said. Not a question. Mara sank beside him. No, she whispered. Nico pressed a red crayon hard enough it almost broke. I hate them, he muttered. Mara's chest tightened. Don't hate, she said automatically, because she'd heard staff say it 1,000 times. But Nico's glare was fierce. Why not? He demanded. They get to do whatever they want. Mara didn't have a clean answer. That night, she lay awake listening to the heater clank and Tessa's slow breathing. Her mind replayed the hotel lobby, Evans crying, Adrian Vale's cold voice. Why would a man who ran a charity foundation be so quick to crush someone without proof? And why had Evan looked at Mara through the glass like she was the only calm place he knew? The next afternoon, Mara went to the community library to use the computers for job applications. The library smelled like dust and paper, safe and quiet. She typed her name into a search bar, curious and afraid. A local society blog had already posted photos from the Vale Foundation event. There was Adrian Vale smiling stiffly beside donors. There was Evan, small and serious. And in the background of one photo, blurry but recognizable, was Mara at the lobby doors, caught mid-step as security ushered her out. The caption read, Unfortunate incident with former staff quickly resolved. Former staff. Like she was a spilled drink. Her stomach twisted. She scrolled, and something else caught her eye. A comment from someone named Celeste M. We take security very seriously. Our guests deserve protection. Celeste, the same sleek-suited woman who'd held Evan's shoulder. Mara clicked her profile. Celeste Morland, Chief Operations Officer, Vale Hotels and Resorts. Of course, power had a name, and it was already shaping the story. Mara's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and she did something she hadn't allowed herself to do yet. She searched for Missing Watch St. Ainsley. Nothing official came up. No police report, no article, just whispers. That made her pause. If a watch worth that much went missing, why wasn't law enforcement involved? Why was it handled quietly, internally, like they didn't want outside eyes? Mara's heart beat faster. She thought of the day she'd been fired, the manager's rushed movements, the way he'd avoided her gaze. She thought of something she hadn't wanted to think about. As she'd been escorted down the service hallway, she'd seen a door cracked open to the staff office, and inside, she'd seen Celeste Morland's sharp silhouette leaning over a desk with a folder in her hand. Celeste had looked up and met Mara's eyes for half a second, cold, calculating, then shut the door. Mara hadn't understood it then. Now she wondered, was Celeste covering something? Had Mara been chosen as a convenient scapegoat? If so, could Mara prove it? She still had nothing but her word. Until she remembered something else. When security pushed her out, her badge had been ripped off, and in the struggle, a small black flash drive had tumbled from someone's pocket and skittered under a bench near the door. Mara had pocketed it without thinking, pure instinct, because at Harbour House, you learned to grab anything that might help later. She'd shoved it into her drawer and forgotten it in the chaos. That night, Mara dug through her drawer under the bed and found it, cool and heavy in her palm. The plastic had a tiny silver V on it. Vale. Her pulse thudded. What was on it? Why would a Vale executive carry a flash drive at a gala? She stared at it in the dim light, fear and hope twisting together. If she opened it, could it clear her name or ruin her completely? She didn't know. But she did know she was running out of choices. And when she looked up from the flash drive, she saw Ms. Darlene standing in the doorway, face pale. "Mara," Ms. Darlene said quietly, "the board is asking questions about you. Someone from the Vale Foundation called today." Mara's mouth went dry. Why would the foundation call the shelter? What could they want from an orphan girl they'd already labeled a thief? And if Adrian Vale's world was reaching into Harbour House, was it coming to help or to destroy? The call turned into an invitation, delivered like it was a gift. 2 days later, Miss Darlene handed Mara a glossy card with gold lettering. Vale Foundation Community Open House. It promised resources for youth, scholarship opportunities, and partnership announcements. It was being held at a bright new community center on the east side, the kind of place with clean windows and fresh paint that Harbour House never had. "They want some of the older kids there," Ms. Darlene said, voice tight. "They're offering grants. The board thinks we should show up and look grateful." Mara's fingers tightened around the card. "They called about me," she said. Ms. Darlene avoided her gaze. "They asked if you were a resident," she admitted. "I didn't say much." Mara's skin prickled. Did Adrian Vale remember her name? Had Celeste Morland demanded information? Or was it Evan who'd asked? Because Evan had looked at her like he didn't forget. "You don't have to go," Ms. Darlene added, then sighed. "But if you don't, and they take offense and we can't afford that." There it was again. The shelter's survival balanced on the feelings of wealthy strangers. Mara swallowed the anger rising in her throat. "I'll go," she said, because she would not be the reason Harbour House lost funding, even if it meant walking into Vale's orbit again. The morning of the open house, Mara borrowed a plain navy sweater from Tessa and smoothed it down until it looked less worn. She rode the bus with Nico and 2 other kids, the bus smelling like wet wool and metal. Nico sat beside her, legs bouncing. "Are there snacks?" he asked. Mara almost smiled. "Probably," she said. The community center was bright and loud, with balloons and a banner. The air smelled like coffee and new carpet. Volunteers in matching shirts handed out brochures. Mara felt out of place in her thrift store shoes, surrounded by people who spoke in polished voices about impact and initiatives. She kept one hand in her pocket, fingers curled around the flash drive like a secret. She told herself she was here for the shelter, not for revenge. She told herself she could keep her head down. Then she heard a familiar small voice. "Mara!" Evan's shout cut through the crowd. Heads turned. Mara froze. Evan came running, weaving between adults, his cheeks pink with excitement. He stopped in front of her and held up a piece of paper, a drawing of a little figure holding a boat. "I made this," he said breathlessly. "I kept the boat in my backpack. When I can't breathe, I squeeze it." Mara's throat tightened. "That's really smart," she managed, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "How are you?" Evan's smile wavered. "Dad is still mad a lot," he admitted. "But I told him you're not bad. I told him you saved me." Mara's heart thudded. She glanced around, panic rising. Where was Adrian Vale? Where was Celeste? Then she saw them across the room near a stage. Adrian Vale, in a charcoal suit, talking to a circle of donors, his expression composed like armor. Beside him stood Celeste Morland, sleek as a blade, her hand lightly touching his arm as if she belonged there. Celeste's eyes swept the room and landed on Mara. The look Celeste gave her wasn't surprise. It was recognition mixed with annoyance, like seeing a stain you thought you'd scrubbed out. Mara's spine went cold. Evan tugged her sleeve. "Come," he whispered. "Dad has to hear you. He thinks you're—" He hesitated, eyes dropping. "He thinks you're a thief." Mara's chest tightened. "Evan," she said softly, "I can't just—" But Evan had already grabbed her hand, small fingers warm and insistent, pulling her forward. Mara stood, heart pounding, and let herself be guided through the crowd like she had no choice. Maybe she didn't. Adrian Vale turned as they approached, and his eyes narrowed the moment he saw Mara. The donors' smiles faltered. The room seemed to tilt again, like the hotel lobby. Evan stopped in front of his father, still holding Mara's hand like a shield. "Dad," Evan said, voice trembling but brave. "This is Mara. She helped me when I couldn't breathe." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Evan," he said sharply, then forced his voice smoother for the donors. "Go stand with Mrs. Redding." A woman with kind eyes, Adrian's assistant, Mara realized, the same one she'd seen near Evan at the hotel, stepped forward. Evan clung harder. "No," he insisted. "She didn't do anything wrong." The donors shifted, uncomfortable. Celeste's smile sharpened. "This is not appropriate," Celeste murmured, loud enough for Mara to hear. Adrian's gaze pinned Mara. "Why are you here?" he asked, low. Mara swallowed. "Harbor House was invited," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm a resident." Something flickered in Adrian's face. Surprise, maybe. Quickly buried. "You live at Harbor House," he repeated, as if testing the words. Mara nodded. Evan looked between them, confused. "That's where Nico lives," he said, pointing at the boy behind Mara. Nico stared wide-eyed at the rich man, then at Mara, then frowned as if deciding he didn't like this. Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Vale," she said smoothly, "we have press here. We can address, personal matters later." Adrian's lips pressed into a line. Then, to Mara's shock, he said, "Come with me." It wasn't a request. It was a command, dressed as calm. He gestured toward a side hallway away from cameras. Mara's instinct screamed to run, to refuse, to protect herself. But Evan's hand still held hers, and his eyes begged. Mara exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said, and let Adrian lead them toward the quieter corridor with Celeste trailing like a shadow. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner, too clean, like nothing bad had ever happened there. Adrian stopped near a closed door. He looked down at Evan. His voice softened a fraction. "Go with Mrs. Redding," he said, and this time he added, "Please." Evan hesitated, then released Mara's hand reluctantly and walked away, looking back over his shoulder. The moment they were alone, Adrian's gaze turned hard again. "You put yourself near my son," he said, accusation in every word. Mara flinched. "He was crying," she replied. "He was alone. I didn't know—" "You didn't know who he was," Adrian cut in, and something in his tone suggested he believed that even if he didn't want to. Celeste stepped closer, arms folded. "We warned you to stay away from our properties," she said, voice silk over steel. Mara's pulse raced. "This isn't your property," she snapped before she could stop herself. "It's a community center." Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everything we fund is our concern," she replied. Adrian held up a hand, silencing Celeste, then looked at Mara again. "If you're innocent," he said quietly, "why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you fight?" Mara laughed once, bitter. "Because I'm an orphan girl," she said. "Who would listen to me over you?" Adrian's eyes flickered, something like discomfort passing through. For a moment, Mara saw not just a powerful man, but a tired one. Then Celeste spoke again. "We can end this quickly," she said. "You return any information you have, you stay away, and Harbor House receives its grant." Mara's breath caught. "Any information you have." Celeste's gaze slid, just for a second, to Mara's pocket. The flash drive felt like it burned her skin. So Celeste knew. That meant it mattered. Mara's mind raced. What was on it that Celeste wanted back so badly? Adrian's brows knit. "What information?" he asked, turning to Celeste. Celeste's smile tightened. "Nothing," she said smoothly. "Just ensuring no misunderstandings." Adrian's eyes narrowed at Celeste, suspicion sparking. A shift, small but real. Mara saw it and clung to it. "I didn't steal anything," Mara said, voice shaking but firm. "But I think someone used me to cover their tracks." Adrian stared at her, and for the first time his certainty wavered. "Prove it," he said. Mara swallowed. She could pull out the flash drive right now. She could gamble everything. But if she did it wrong, if she accused without proof, she could sink Harbor House. She could destroy herself. She looked down the corridor where Evan had disappeared, and she made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Give me one chance," she said. "One meeting, private, no cameras, and if I'm wrong, I'll disappear." Adrian's jaw worked. Celeste's eyes flashed warning. Adrian glanced toward the open house noise, then back at Mara. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "My office, 10 a.m. Mara's heart pounded. "I'm barred from the hotel," she reminded him. Adrian's mouth tightened. "I can unbar you," he said. "I can do a lot of things." The power in his voice made Mara's stomach twist, but the crack in his certainty gave her hope. Celeste stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "Be careful," she murmured to Mara. "People like you don't survive mistakes in worlds like ours." Mara held her gaze, refusing to look away. Then she turned and walked back toward Nico and the others with her head high, even though her knees felt weak. Tomorrow she would step into Adrian Vale's office. Tomorrow she might clear her name or be crushed for good. But what would she actually find on that flash drive when she finally opened it? And why did she feel like the biggest secret wasn't just about a missing watch, but about the kind of man Adrian Vale really was? Mara didn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in the corner of the girls' room at Harbour House, with the library's free earbuds plugged into an old laptop Tessa had borrowed. The flash drive rested beside the keyboard like a dare. Outside, wind rattled the window. Inside, the heater clanked. Tessa watched Mara with worried eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she whispered. Mara's fingers hovered over the trackpad. "If I don't," Mara said, voice tight, "they'll keep calling me a thief. I'll never get hired, and Harbour House will keep bending to them." Tessa swallowed. "Just be careful," she said. Mara nodded, then slid the flash drive in. The computer made a soft chime. A folder opened. Inside were spreadsheets, scanned documents, and one audio file labeled meeting notes. Mara's heart hammered. She clicked the audio file first. A man's voice filled her ears, Celeste Morland's voice, smooth and confident. Another voice responded, lower, nervous. Mara leaned closer, breath shallow. Celeste was saying, "If it becomes a police matter, auditors come. We don't want auditors. We handle it internally." The nervous voice said, "But what if the girl talks?" Celeste laughed softly. "She won't. She needs the job. And if she does, we can make her look unstable." Mara's stomach turned. Her hands shook. The recording continued. Celeste discussing reallocating funds from the Foundation's community grants into operational necessity, talking about creative accounting, and then, Mara's breath caught, Celeste said, "We'll blame the missing watch on staff. Find someone with no family, no connections, someone easy." Mara ripped the earbuds out, chest tight. Tessa's eyes widened. "What is it?" Tessa demanded. Mara's voice came out thin. "It's her," she whispered. "Celeste." She said they chose me because I have no family." Tessa's face went pale. "That's evil," she breathed. Mara stared at the laptop screen. Anger and fear tangling. So it was real. Celeste had framed her, and she had proof. But proof was only useful if someone powerful was forced to look at it. Would Adrian Vale look, or would he protect Celeste to protect himself? Mara clicked open the spreadsheets with trembling hands. The numbers were dense, but Mara wasn't helpless with them. She'd helped Ms. Darlene track donations before. She'd learned to read budgets because Harbour House lived and died by them. As she scanned, patterns emerged. Large transfers labeled as consulting fees to a shell company, Morland Strategies, and expenses that didn't match any project listed. There were notes about cutting a youth counseling program. Then, in a separate line, the same amount paid out as a retention bonus. Mara's throat burned. This wasn't just about her job. This was money meant for kids like Nico. Money meant for beds and textbooks and counselors. Money stolen in clean lines of ink. She closed her eyes, fighting nausea. What was she supposed to do with this? If she took it to the police, would they take her seriously? If she took it to Adrian, would he bury it? And if Celeste found out she had it, what would Celeste do to protect herself? The next morning, Mara rode the bus alone to St. Ainsley. The sky was grey, the city damp. She wore Tessa's navy sweater and clutched a folder she'd printed at the library. Pages of highlighted numbers and a transcript of Celeste's recording. Her hands were so sweaty, the paper edges softened. The hotel rose ahead like a palace. Warm light glowed behind the glass. Doorman nodded at guests and ignored everyone else. Mara approached the entrance, heart pounding, expecting a guard to stop her. Instead, the same guard who'd escorted her out looked at a list on his tablet, then stepped aside. "You're cleared," he said curtly. The words felt unreal. Cleared. She walked into the lobby, and the scent hit her again. Flowers, polish, expensive calm. Her stomach tightened. A receptionist eyed her as if assessing worth. "Mr. Vale's office," Mara said, voice steady through effort. An elevator carried her up, smooth and silent. No clank like Harbour House's old stairwell. The carpet in the hallway was thick enough to swallow footsteps. She reached a door with frosted glass. Vale. Her hand hovered before she knocked. What if Adrian laughed and threw her out again? What if he took the papers and told Celeste? What if this was a trap? The door opened before she knocked. Mrs. Redding, the assistant with kind eyes, stood there. "Mara," she said quietly. "Come in." Mara stepped into an office that smelled like leather and coffee. Adrian Vale stood by the window, looking down at the city like it belonged to him. He turned slowly. His expression was controlled, but there were shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept either. "You came," he said. "You told me to," Mara replied, then hated how small her voice sounded. Adrian's gaze flicked to the folder in her hands. "Show me," he said. Mara set the folder on his desk. Her fingers shook as she opened it. "This is proof," she said. Celeste recorded herself. She said she needed a scapegoat. She said she chose someone with no family. Adrian's jaw tightened. He picked up the transcript, eyes scanning. The room felt too quiet. Mara could hear the faint hum of the building, the distant ding of an elevator, the soft click of Adrian's watch against the desk. He reached for the audio file on a small speaker Mrs. Redding placed down. Celeste's voice filled the office again. Adrian's face changed in slow increments, first disbelief, then anger, then something like shame. When Celeste's laugh played, Adrian's hand curled into a fist. "This is edited?" he demanded, but the question sounded weak, like he already knew the answer. "It's not," Mara said. "I didn't even know what it was until last night." Adrian looked up sharply. "Where did you get this?" Mara swallowed. "It fell from someone's pocket the day you fired me," she admitted. Adrian flinched at the word fired. His mouth opened, then closed. "Why didn't you bring it sooner?" he asked. Mara stared at him. "Because you called me a thief in front of everyone," she said, voice rising. "Because I'm an orphan girl and you're Adrian Vale. I didn't think you'd listen." Adrian's face tightened. Mrs. Redding shifted, eyes down. Adrian set the papers down carefully, like they burned. "Celeste has been with my company for 6 years," he said, voice low. She helped expand the foundation." He looked at Mara, and for the first time his eyes held something like regret. "If this is true—" "It is true," Mara cut in, then softened because her own fear was sharp. "And it's not just about me. She's moving money. Foundation money. Money meant for kids." Adrian's throat worked. He turned toward the window again, staring out as if the city might give him answers. "Evan's school counselor was cut last month," he murmured, almost to himself. "Celeste said it was budget." Mara's heart clenched. So the theft reached even into his own child's life. Adrian turned back, decision hardening. "You will not speak to anyone else about this yet," he said, and Mara's stomach dropped, thinking he meant to bury it. Then he added, "Because if we do this wrong, she destroys the evidence and she destroys you." Mara blinked. "You believe me?" she whispered. Adrian's jaw flexed. "I believe the recording," he said. "And I believe my son when he says you're not bad." The words hit Mara like a wave, relief mixed with anger, because it took his son's opinion to make her human. Adrian walked to his desk, pressed a button. "Redding," he said, voice clipped. "Get internal audit here quietly and call legal." Mrs. Redding nodded and moved quickly. Mara's pulse raced. This was happening. Adrian looked at Mara again. "You're reinstated," he said suddenly. Mara's breath caught. "What?" "Temporarily," Adrian clarified. "With pay, and you'll be under my protection until this is resolved." The word protection sounded strange from him. Mara's eyes stung. "I don't want charity," she whispered. Adrian's gaze held hers. "It's not charity," he said. "It's responsibility." Then the door opened without a knock, and Celeste Morland stepped in as if she owned the room. She wore a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Adrian?" she said sweetly. Then her gaze landed on Mara and sharpened. "Oh, this is unexpected." Adrian's voice went dangerously calm. "Close the door," he said. Celeste's smile flickered. She shut it. "Why is she here?" Celeste asked, tone light. Adrian picked up the transcript and held it up. "Because she brought me this," he said. For the first time, Celeste's mask slipped, just a crack. Her eyes darted to Mara's pocket, where the flash drive likely still was. "That could be fabricated," Celeste said quickly, recovering. "Adrian, you can't seriously—" Adrian cut her off. "We're auditing the foundation," he said. Celeste's smile froze. The air in the office turned sharp. Mara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Celeste's gaze slid to Mara, and in it Mara saw pure threat. "Be very careful," Celeste murmured, echoing her earlier warning, but now it sounded like a promise. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Leave," he told Celeste. Celeste's jaw tightened. She turned toward the door, then paused. "If you do this," she said softly, "you'll embarrass yourself. You'll embarrass your son, and some people will suffer for it." Her eyes flicked, meaningfully, toward Harbour House. Mara's blood ran cold. Celeste left, the door clicking shut like a trap. Adrian exhaled slowly, then looked at Mara. "What did she mean?" he asked. Mara's voice shook. "She knows where I live," she whispered. "And she knows my shelter depends on your funding." Adrian's expression hardened. "Then we move fast," he said. Mara swallowed. Moving fast in their world could still crush her in hers. Would Adrian truly protect her when things got messy? And what would Celeste do now that she knew Mara had proof and was no longer powerless? Celeste moved faster than Mara imagined possible. By the time Mara got back to Harbour House that evening, Miss Darlene was waiting in the entryway, face tight, phone in hand. The kids' voices echoed down the hall, but the air felt wrong, like a storm had slipped inside. "Mara," Miss Darlene said, voice low. "We got a call." Mara's stomach sank. "From who?" she whispered, though she already knew. Miss Darlene swallowed. "From the Vale Foundation," she said. "From Ms. Morland." Mara's skin went cold. "What did she say?" Ms. Darlene's eyes shone with anger and fear. "She said there's an allegation," Ms. Darlene said, each word forced, "that you stole donation funds during the open house, that you were seen near the supply table where the cash box was." Mara's breath left her lungs. "That's a lie," she said, voice cracking. Ms. Darlene nodded sharply. "I know," she hissed, "but the board is panicking. They're asking if we should suspend you from the shelter until it's cleared up. Suspend you, like she was a bad kid, like she was disposable." Mara's knees went weak. "They can't," she whispered. "This is my home." Ms. Darlene's face twisted. "This place is their home," she said, gesturing toward the hallway where Nico's laugh floated, unaware. "And if donors pull out, we lose beds." Mara's throat burned. The world tightened around her again, power squeezing the air out of poor lungs. Mara clenched her hands. "I can fix this," she said, though she didn't know how. Ms. Darlene's gaze softened a fraction. "Can you?" she asked. "Because Morland also said, she said if we don't handle this properly, they'll reconsider our grant." Mara's vision blurred. She stumbled into the girls' room and sat on her bed, staring at the worn blanket. Tessa sat beside her, face pale. "They're trying to kick you out," Tessa whispered. Mara nodded, numb. "Because I told the truth," she murmured. In the hallway later, Nico found her sitting on the stairs, head in her hands. He stopped, frown deepening. "What happened?" he demanded. Mara tried to smile, but it failed. "Nothing you need to worry about," she lied, because she couldn't bear to see fear in his eyes. Nico crossed his arms. "That's what grown-ups say when everything is bad," he muttered. Mara looked up at him, and the ache in her chest split wider. "I'm trying," she whispered. Nico's expression softened just a fraction. He sat beside her on the step, shoulder against hers. "If they make you leave," he said, voice small, "will you come back?" Mara's throat tightened so hard she could barely speak. "I don't know," she admitted, because she refused to lie to him like people had lied to her. Nico stared at the floor, jaw clenched, and Mara hated Celeste Morland more in that moment than she thought she could hate anyone. The next day at St. Ainsley, Adrian's internal auditor arrived, faces serious, folders thick. Adrian kept Mara in a small conference room away from the lobby. like he understood she couldn't face that marble stage again. He sat across from her, sleeves rolled up for the first time she'd seen, as if he were trying to become someone less untouchable. "Morland is threatening your shelter," he said, anger low. Mara nodded, hands clasped tight. "She accused me of stealing at the open house," Mara said. Adrian's eyes flashed. "She's escalating," he muttered. "That means she's afraid." Mara swallowed. "Fear makes people crueler," she said quietly. Adrian leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Why did you help Evan?" he asked suddenly, as if he needed to understand the one thing he couldn't calculate. Mara blinked at the question. "Because he was crying," she answered simply. "Because I know what it's like to think no one is coming." Adrian stared at her, something raw passing through his face. "Evan's mother left 2 years ago," he said, voice tight. She didn't handle my world well. She said I cared more about appearances than people." Mara's chest tightened. "Maybe she wasn't wrong," Mara said before she could stop herself, then winced, expecting anger. Adrian's jaw clenched, but instead of snapping, he looked down. "Maybe I wasn't," he admitted. The admission felt like another crack in armor. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it made him human enough to hold accountable. The auditor knocked, interrupting. "We found discrepancies," the auditor said, tone grim. "Large transfers, unapproved." Adrian's eyes hardened. "Get everything," he ordered. "Lock it down." As the day went on, Mara's phone buzzed with texts from Tessa. "Board meeting tonight. They're serious." Mara's stomach twisted. She couldn't breathe. Evan appeared later with Mrs. Redding, walking quietly into the conference room like he sensed tension. He held his paper boat, now wrinkled and soft from being squeezed. "Hi," Evan said to Mara, voice small. Mara forced a smile. "Hi, Evan." Evan looked at his father, then at Mara. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. Adrian's mouth tightened. Mara didn't want Evan carrying adult war on his small shoulders. "Not if we tell the truth," Mara said softly. Evan nodded like that made sense. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the drawing he'd shown her before, then another paper folded underneath. "I found this," he whispered, glancing at his father, as if unsure. He handed it to Mara. It was a crumpled receipt, the kind from a store register, and on it was a handwritten note. "Move box before photos, CM." Mara's pulse spiked. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Evan swallowed. "It fell out of Celeste's folder when she was talking to Dad," he said. I picked it up because she said my name and I got scared." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Celeste said your name?" he asked Evan. Evan nodded. "She said, 'If Evan ever talks about the girl, we handle it,'" he whispered, voice trembling. Adrian's face went pale with fury. Mara's hands shook as she stared at the note. "Move box before photos." It sounded like staging, like setting someone up. This could help prove Celeste's open house accusation was a trap, a small piece but real. Mara looked at Adrian, hope flickering. "We can use this," she whispered. Adrian nodded slowly. "We will," he said, voice hard. Then Mara's phone rang. "Ms. Darlene." Mara answered, heart pounding. Ms. Darlene's voice was tight with panic. "Mara," she said, "the board voted. They want you out tonight. They said it's temporary until the allegation is cleared, but, Mara, they're packing your things." Mara's breath caught. Her vision blurred. Adrian stood sharply, hearing her side. "Put it on speaker," he demanded, and Mara did, hands shaking. Ms. Darlene's voice filled the room. Adrian's expression hardened into something dangerous. "This is Adrian Vale," he said. Silence on the line. "I will personally guarantee Harbour House's funding," he said, each word clear, "and I will personally speak to your board. Mara Kline is not leaving." Ms. Darlene exhaled shakily. "Mr. Vale, You will wait," Adrian cut in. He ended the call and looked at Mara, eyes blazing. "No one is putting you on the street again," he said. Mara's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her had learned not to, because words from powerful men could change with the wind. Adrian turned to Mrs. Redding. "Schedule an emergency board meeting tonight," he said. "Invite Morland. Invite the press if needed." Mara's stomach flipped. "Press?" she whispered. Adrian's gaze met hers. "She's using exposure as a weapon," he said, "so we take it away." Mara's pulse raced. A public fight could destroy her. It could destroy Harbour House, but it could also be the only way to force truth into the light. Mara looked down at Evan's wrinkled paper boat in his hands, at the way he squeezed it for courage. She swallowed. "If we do this," Mara said softly, "she'll come for me harder." Adrian's voice was low. "Then we stand anyway," he replied. Mara's hands shook, but she nodded. Tonight, truth would either set her free or make her fall in front of everyone. And if Celeste Morland was cornered, what else would she try to burn down to save herself? That evening, the boardroom at St. Ainsley felt colder than the lobby ever had. The long table gleamed under bright lights. Water glasses sat untouched. Outside the windows, the city blinked with distant headlights, unaware of the battle happening high above it. Mara sat near the end of the table, hands folded in her lap, trying not to look like she didn't belong. She could feel her thrifted sweater against the smooth leather chair, a reminder of worlds colliding. Adrian sat at the head, posture rigid. Mrs. Redding stood near the wall with a tablet, calm but alert. Across the table, Harbour House board members arrived with nervous faces, people who meant well, but had learned to fear losing donations more than losing dignity. Ms. Darlene sat among them, shoulders tight, eyes apologetic. Celeste Morland entered last, heels clicking, wearing confidence like perfume. She smiled at the board members, nodded at Adrian as if nothing was wrong, and then her gaze slid to Mara. "Well," Celeste said lightly, "this is dramatic." Adrian didn't smile. "Sit," he said. Celeste's smile tightened, but she took a seat, crossing her legs, hands folded neatly. The room held its breath. Mara's heart pounded. Would anyone believe an orphan girl over a polished executive? Would Adrian hold the line when the room got uncomfortable? Adrian began without small talk. "There have been allegations against Mara Kline," he said, voice controlled. "2 allegations. Theft at St. Ainsley, theft at the community open house." Celeste's eyes widened in practiced innocence. "We take theft seriously," she said, tone sweet. "Especially when it involves vulnerable populations." Mara's stomach twisted at the way Celeste used the word vulnerable like a prop. Adrian lifted a hand. "We are not here for speeches," he said. "We are here for facts." He nodded to Mrs. Redding, who tapped her tablet. A screen at the end of the room lit up with a spreadsheet. Numbers, transfers, notes, the auditor's findings. Celeste's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. "These are internal documents," Celeste said. "Why are they being shown to Harbour House?" Adrian's gaze was ice. "Because Harbour House is being threatened," he replied. He turned to the shelter board members. "You were prepared to remove Mara tonight," he said. "Because you were afraid of losing a grant." One board member, a man with thin glasses, cleared his throat. "We have to think of the children," he said defensively. Mara's hands clenched. "I am one of your children," she wanted to shout, but she stayed silent, throat tight. Adrian nodded slowly. "Exactly," he said. "So let's think of the children." He tapped the table. "These transfers," he said, "represent funds earmarked for youth counseling, school supplies, shelter maintenance. They were moved into a shell company associated with Celeste Morland." A murmur rippled through the room. Celeste laughed softly, dismissive. "That's a misunderstanding," she said. "Those were consulting fees." Adrian leaned forward. "Consulting for what?" he asked. Celeste's eyes flashed. "For operational efficiency," she said smoothly. "For expanding outreach." Adrian's voice stayed calm. "And the missing watch?" he asked. Celeste's smile tightened. "A separate matter," she said. Adrian nodded. "Then let's address it," he said, and he pressed a button on a small speaker. Celeste's voice filled the room, loud and unmistakable. "Find someone with no family, no connections, someone easy." Silence slammed down. Mara's breath caught. The shelter board members stared, shocked. Ms. Darlene's hand flew to her mouth. Celeste's face went still, like a mask glued on too tight. Adrian turned the speaker off. "That recording was found on a flash drive dropped at St. Ainsley the day Mara was fired," he said. "It is time-stamped. It will be verified by independent investigators." Celeste's voice sharpened. "Adrian," she snapped, dropping the sweetness. "You can't be serious. You're going to blow up the foundation over a disgruntled former employee." Mara flinched at the word disgruntled. Adrian's eyes burned. I fired her without evidence, he said, and the admission made the room shift. I did that, and I was wrong. Mara's eyes stung. She hadn't expected him to say it out loud in front of people. Celeste's gaze whipped to him, disbelief and fury twisting. You're making a spectacle, Celeste hissed. Think of your reputation. Think of Evan. At the mention of Evan, Adrian's face tightened. Evan is why I'm doing this, he said quietly. I won't teach my son that power means you never have to face consequences. Celeste's hands clenched on the table. Consequences, she echoed, voice sharp. You think you're clean? You signed off on budgets. You let me run the foundation because you didn't want to see the messy parts. You don't get to suddenly become a hero. Adrian's jaw flexed. The board members shifted uneasily. Celeste turned to them, voice urgent. If this goes public, she said, donations will crash. Harbor House will suffer. The children will suffer. Is that what you want? The Thin Glasses board member swallowed, eyes darting. Mara's stomach dropped. Celeste was good. She was turning the room back toward fear. Mara's hands shook. She could feel herself shrinking, the old orphan reflex. Stay quiet, don't make waves, survive. Then she remembered Nico's question. If they make you leave, will you come back? She thought of Evan squeezing his wrinkled boat. She thought of all the kids who didn't get second chances because adults were scared. Mara stood up. Her chair scraped the floor, loud in the tense room. Every face turned toward her. Her mouth went dry, but she forced words out. I didn't come here to be anyone's hero, Mara said, voice trembling. I came here because you called me a thief, and you thought I'd take it because I'm an orphan girl with no one to fight for me. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Mara continued, louder now, strength rising from somewhere deep. But Harbor House has kids who are watching, she said. They are learning what adults do when someone powerful lies. If you throw me out to protect a grant, you're teaching them they're always disposable. The shelter board members looked down, shame flickering. Mara turned slightly, addressing the whole room. Celeste says donations will crash if the truth comes out, Mara said. Maybe they will. Maybe it will be hard. But what's the point of a foundation if it survives by hurting the same people it claims to help? Her voice cracked, but she kept going. She pulled Evan's crumpled receipt note from her folder and held it up. She also tried to frame me again at the open house, Mara said. This note was in her folder, move box before photos. She staged the cash box location. She needed a new accusation to scare me into silence. Celeste's face flushed. That's ridiculous, she snapped. Adrian looked at the note, then at Celeste, disgust hardening. Enough, he said. Celeste stood abruptly, chair scraping. You think you can do this without me? She hissed at Adrian. You think you can keep your empire clean? I made your numbers look good. Adrian's voice turned cold. And you stole from children to do it, he said. Celeste's gaze darted, calculating escape routes. Adrian nodded to the door. 2 security officers stepped in, professional, calm. Celeste's eyes widened. You can't, she began. Adrian's voice was iron. You are suspended pending investigation, he said. Your access is revoked. Your accounts are frozen. Celeste's breath hitched. She looked at Mara with pure hatred. This is your fault, she spat. Mara's hands shook, but she held Celeste's gaze. No, Mara said softly. It's yours. The officers escorted Celeste out. Her heels clicked faster, then disappeared. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for years. Adrian turned to the shelter board members. The foundation will continue funding Harbor House, he said, but not through channels that can be manipulated. We will create an independent trust with oversight that includes community members. The Thin Glasses board member nodded weakly. Ms. Darlene's shoulders sagged with relief. Adrian looked at Mara, his expression heavy. Your termination will be reversed, he said. A public correction will be issued, and your locket will be returned. Mara's breath caught at the mention of the locket. Her eyes stung. She hadn't realized how much she needed that small piece of metal until the possibility of getting it back sat in the room like a warm light. Adrian's voice softened just slightly. I'm sorry, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that everyone heard. Mara's knees trembled. An apology didn't erase the pain, but it did something important. It told the room she had been wronged. It gave her back a shape in the world. Still, as the meeting ended and people filed out, Mara's phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. It was a photo of Harbour House's front door taken from across the street, and beneath it, one line, "Truth has a price." Mara's fingers went numb. Celeste might be out of the building, but she wasn't done. Mara looked up at Adrian, fear rising again. Would his protection hold when threats moved outside boardrooms? And what price would an orphan girl be forced to pay for making powerful people face the truth? For 2 days after the board meeting, Mara jumped at every car door outside Harbour House. Every time the phone rang, her stomach tightened. She watched the younger kids more closely, walking Nico to school even when she was exhausted, scanning the street for anything that felt wrong. The photo message stayed in her mind like a bruise you keep pressing. Adrian's legal team reported it to authorities, but reported didn't make Mara feel safe. It just made her feel like a file in a drawer. Still, something did change. The hotel issued a quiet statement first, then a louder one when local reporters started asking questions about foundation finances. Mara's name appeared in print again, but this time the headline wasn't "Incident." It was "Employee wrongfully terminated amid internal investigation." Mara read it 3 times in the library, hands shaking, because she couldn't believe the world could say she was wronged instead of guilty. People at Harbour House treated her differently too. Some staff looked embarrassed, some looked proud, some looked simply relieved that the funding wasn't gone. Nico read the article over her shoulder and frowned. "So you weren't lying," he said, like he needed the confirmation even though he'd believed her anyway. Mara managed a small smile. "I wasn't," she said. Nico nodded once, satisfied, then shoved his hands in his hoodie pocket. "Good," he muttered. "I would have been mad forever." On the 3rd day, Adrian asked Mara to come to the hotel again, not for a meeting, but for something he said he owed her. Mara hesitated in the lobby, the marble still too bright, the air still too expensive. Mrs. Redding met her and guided her upstairs. "He's different with you," Mrs. Redding said quietly as they walked. Mara glanced at her. "Different how?" Mrs. Redding's mouth tightened. "Less certain," she admitted. "More awake." Mara didn't know if that was good or dangerous. Adrian waited in his office, and Evan was there too, sitting on the couch with his paper boat now carefully taped at the corners. Evan jumped up when he saw Mara. "You came," he said, relief spilling out like he'd been holding it in. Mara's throat tightened. "Hi, Evan," she said softly. Adrian stood behind his desk, holding something small in his hand. He looked at Mara, and for a moment he didn't look like the man who had fired her. He looked like a man trying to do the right thing after doing something wrong. "This was found," he said, and he extended his hand. In his palm lay Mara's silver locket, chain neatly coiled, the metal polished as if someone had cleaned it carefully. Mara's breath caught. She stepped forward slowly, as if afraid it would vanish. Her fingers closed around it, and the cool metal grounded her in a way nothing else had. She opened it with trembling hands. The tiny photo inside was still there, 2 faces smiling softly, her whole history in a blur. Her eyes burned. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Adrian nodded once. "I should have returned it immediately," he said. "I should have done a lot of things." Evan watched Mara's face and held out his boat. "Mine got wrinkly," he said, worried. "But it still works." Mara laughed through tears. "Wrinkly things can still work," she said, and Evan's shoulders relaxed. Adrian cleared his throat. "Mara," he said, voice careful, "I spoke with Harbour House's board. The independent trust is being set up, and I want to fund a scholarship." Mara's chest tightened. "For the shelter?" she asked, wary. Adrian shook his head. "For you," he said. Mara froze. Pride flared. "I don't want pity," she said quickly. Adrian's gaze held hers. "It's not pity," he replied. "It's restitution. And it's investment in someone who did what I claim to value." Mara swallowed. "What if you change your mind?" she asked, the orphan fear slipping out before she could hide it. Adrian's expression tightened, and for the first time his voice softened without cameras nearby. "Then you hold me accountable," he said. "I'm learning that's how this should work." Mara stared at him, stunned. Evan climbed onto the couch and looked between them like a small referee. "Dad," Evan said, earnest, "you have to stop being mean when you're scared." Adrian blinked, then let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I know," he admitted, and he rubbed Evan's hair gently. The gesture was small, but it mattered. Mara's chest ached. She had calmed Evan when no one else could, but she couldn't fix Adrian's heart for him. Adrian had to do that himself. "There's one more thing," Adrian said, turning back to Mara. "Celeste is being investigated and charges are likely, but I want you to understand. This will get noisy. People will gossip. Some donors will leave. Some will blame you." Mara's stomach tightened. "I'm used to being blamed," she said quietly. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have to be," he replied. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a scholarship letter for Mara's nursing assistant program, tuition covered, plus a stipend for transportation. Mara's hands trembled. "This is too much," she whispered. Adrian shook his head. "It's a start," he said. Mara looked down at the letter, then back at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, needing the truth. Adrian's jaw worked. "Because my son trusted you," he said. "And because when you said no one would listen to you over me, I realized I built a world where that's true." He paused, voice rougher. "My mother grew up in a place like Harbor House," he admitted. "She used to tell me the worst thing wasn't being poor. It was being invisible." Mara's breath caught. That explained the foundation. That explained why the betrayal cut him so deeply. Adrian looked away, blinking hard, then met Mara's gaze again. "You made my son feel safe," he said. "And you forced me to see what I was doing to other people. I don't get to undo it, but I can change what happens next." Mara's throat burned. She wanted to believe him completely, but she had learned survival didn't allow full trust. Still, she could accept help without surrendering her dignity. She nodded once. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll take it, and I'll work hard." Evan grinned, then held out his boat to Adrian. "You should make one too," Evan declared. Adrian hesitated, awkward, then took a napkin from his desk and tried folding like Mara had shown Evan. His first fold was crooked. Evan laughed. Mara laughed too, surprised by the sound. For a moment, the room felt lighter. But when Mara left the hotel with her scholarship letter tucked safely in her bag and her locket warm against her chest, her phone buzzed again. A news alert. Vale Foundation scandal. Whistleblower at center of investigation. The word whistleblower made her stomach twist. She wasn't just a girl anymore, she was a story. And stories had sharp edges. Could she handle the attention without losing herself? And could she step into her new life without the old fear whispering that good things never last for orphan girls? Spring came slowly, like it didn't trust the city either. Snow melted into grey slush, then into puddles that reflected thin sunlight. On Mara's first day of her nursing assistant program, she walked into the community college building with her locket under her sweater and her scholarship letter folded in her bag like a fragile shield. The hallway smelled like dry erase markers and coffee. Students hurried past, backpacks bouncing, laughing about exams and weekend plans. Mara felt the familiar pinch of being different, older than some freshmen in the way her eyes carried too much, poorer than most in the scuffed toes of her shoes. She took a deep breath the way she'd taught Evan, in and out. Then she walked into class anyway. It wasn't easy. She struggled with anatomy terms at night under the dim Harbor House lamp. She practiced taking blood pressure on willing classmates, and sometimes her hands shook, not from lack of skill but from the old fear of making a mistake and being thrown away. She still worked part-time, now at a small clinic that didn't care about rumors because the director had read the correction and respected a girl who fought for the truth. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and warm blankets, and sometimes when a frightened child cried in the waiting room, Mara would kneel and fold a quick paper boat from a receipt. "This one is brave," she'd say, and she'd watch their breathing slow. The world didn't become perfect just because Celeste Morland was gone. People still judged. Some online comments called Mara a liar chasing money. Some called Adrian a fool for apologizing. Mara learned to scroll past with a tight chest and keep studying. Harbor House changed too. The independent trust meant repairs finally happened. A window replaced, a new set of bedding, a counselor hired 2 afternoons a week. Nico's school got new supplies, and he pretended not to care while quietly protecting the new notebooks like treasure. One afternoon, as Mara walked back from class, she saw a small group gathered in the shelter's common room around the TV. A local news segment played footage of Adrian Vale, announcing new oversight measures and a youth advisory board that included former shelter residents. Mara's name wasn't spoken. That was a relief. She didn't want to be a symbol forever. She wanted to be a person. After the segment, Ms. Darlene approached Mara with a small smile. "You did something big," she said softly. Mara shook her head. "I did something necessary," she replied. Ms. Darlene nodded, eyes shining. "Fair," she whispered. Evan visited Harbour House once, with Mrs. Redding and Adrian, not in a flashy way, just quietly, like they were trying to learn rather than perform. Evan ran straight to Mara and hugged her waist without asking, and Mara froze for a heartbeat. Touch still sometimes surprised her. Then she hugged him back gently. Adrian stood awkwardly nearby, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who didn't know where to place himself in a world without control. Nico eyed Adrian with suspicion, then marched up and said, "You better not make her cry again." Adrian blinked, then nodded once, solemn. "I won't," he said. Nico narrowed his eyes like he didn't fully believe it, but then Evan dragged Nico away to show him the new paper boats he'd learned to fold. Mara watched them, heart aching in a strange, warm way. Later, Adrian found Mara by the shelter's front steps, where the evening air smelled like damp earth and distant car exhaust. "Thank you," he said quietly. No cameras, no polished speeches. Mara looked at him, still guarded, still remembering the marble lobby. "You already apologized," she said. Adrian nodded. "This isn't the same," he replied. He hesitated, then added, "Evan sleeps with that boat under his pillow sometimes. He says it reminds him someone will come." Mara's throat tightened. "I'm glad," she whispered. Adrian's gaze lowered to her locket chain peeking at her collar. "You kept it," he noted. Mara touched it instinctively. "It's mine," she said simply. Adrian nodded as if he understood the weight of that sentence more now. "If you ever need anything," he began. Mara lifted a hand gently. "What I need," she said, "is for you to keep doing the right thing when it's not convenient." Adrian's mouth tightened. Then he nodded, serious. "I will," he said. Mara didn't say she believed him fully, but she saw the effort, and for now, that mattered. Months later, on a warm afternoon, Mara stood in the clinic break room, folding a paper boat from a spare napkin. Her fingers moved faster now, confident. She wrote one word on the side in neat letters: "Breathe." She slipped it into her pocket before stepping back onto the floor, where patients waited and alarms beeped softly, and life moved forward. That night at Harbour House, Nico sat on the steps beside her and nudged her shoulder. "You're not leaving, right?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Mara swallowed, then smiled gently. "Not tonight," she said. Nico pretended to be annoyed, but his shoulders relaxed. Mara looked up at the sky, dark blue with a few stubborn stars, and she thought about how the story began with a locket lost on marble and a boy crying behind a fountain. She thought about how a small paper boat had held a child's breath together when the world felt too big. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the new boat, setting it carefully on the step between her and Nico, a tiny symbol of what she'd learned. You can be small and still carry hope. If you've ever felt invisible, or if you've ever chosen kindness even when it cost you, you can tell us about it in the comments and stay close for more stories like this.